Thank you, Nimesh. It's a pleasure to be back here in CV and talk about innovation. We started our looking for innovations from here, and we took it down to one of our projects in Bangladesh. I'm going to tell a story here. It's not a scripted presentation, so it's about the journey of a TTL TTL is a task team leader in the World Bank, to make a difference in helping the utilities to serve the unserved population. And that's the story about Chittagong. So thank you, Nimesh, for giving me the platform. I'll be very short and quick. I'm no more the practice manager in the Global Water Program. I am now the practice manager in Africa, East and South. So I would like to take innovations down there. That's what I'm looking for here from this session. Okay, going back to Bangladesh. This was in 2010. The World Bank started a project. It's an urban water supply and sanitation project in the city of Chittagong, which Nimesh already mentioned, is the second largest city with a population of 2.3 million in the city area, with a population of 4.3 million in the metropolitan area. Now, in this city, there was less than 8% piped water supply. So we entered into a city which has got less than 10% pipe water supply for safe drinking water. The entire population was depending on the tube wells, which were hugely polluted and contaminated, and the utility was absolutely nascent in serving the population. So the whole approach to the project was to improve increased access to safe drinking water and do the utility turnaround. So it was a humongous task, because we entered into an utility where there were only 2 people, and we are going to serve a population of 2.3 million, starting from the scratch, or building up the water production, the treatment plant, putting up the networks, doing the secondary networks, and even the tertiary networks. So the project, when we started with, we knew we were going to serve only 40% of the population. With the project, when it is finally commissioned, only 40% of the population of the city will get safe water, while at the metropolitan area, it was going to be only 20%. And we know that 40% of the population were living on the fringes of Chittagong, who are unserved, not even into the customer bracket of the utility. While we are working with the utility to turn around, helping them to do the entire construction and the infrastructure to be set up, yet serve the population, which was suffering from very acute water supply and safe drinking water supply. There were waterborne diseases, and there was already a public outcry. So we were looking at innovation beyond the scope of the project. While we were implementing the project, we were looking at what do you do with those 40% of the population who will remain unserved and beyond the pipes, even when the project is commissioned. So at that time, I was lucky enough to be in CV, and I met this young guy who won the award, and he talked about what he was doing in Dhaka. And I was absolutely startled by the fact that I am working in Chittagong, also starting a project in Dhaka, and I did not know there was an innovation already happening with Dhaka Wasa, who is also one of my clients. So immediately I connected with the Dhaka Wasa MD to find out more about this Bangladeshi entrepreneur, Drinkwell, what they were doing in Dhaka, and how can I bring him to Chittagong and connect with the utility, who would be then be able to find out solutions. It's just not the technological solution, but the financial model, the PPP models that are needed to serve those unconnected population who are going to live even beyond the pipe, even when the project is commissioned. And I was just a connector here and facilitated the utility with Drinkwell. And the rest happened, I'm sure. Minaz will tell the rest of the story. Thank you.
Thank you, Shoma. Let's have Minaj join Shoma on stage here, and I'm going to introduce Anna Marie, the Senior Program Associate at Imagination Show Asia, and she's going to be leading the case studies. Thank you, Shoma. You guys want to take a seat? Okay, great.
Thanks, Sumit. So each case study today will follow the same format as what you can see on the screen. We'll begin with the problem and the solution before giving a status update on the projects that these startups are doing. Then we'll move on to the meat of each case study, which is identifying the win-win theme, and then we'll end off with a discussion question for the audience and a quick Q&A. If we don't have time to answer your questions during the Q&A, we encourage you to join us for the roundtable discussions at the end of the session. But now, to set the scene for our first case study, Here's a short video to introduce Drinkwell and its utility partnership model that was highlighted by Shoma and Nimesh. And again, a reminder that if you scan the QR code at the bottom, you get access to this live graphic illustration of what's happening in the session. But now, let's pass it over to Shoma and Minaj.
Thank you, everybody. It's a real treat to be here. Really exciting to see a lot of familiar friends and faces for the first time in 3 years. And it's really an honor to share the stage with you, Shoma, after a very special journey, I think, where we really were lucky enough to pick up where Shoma's work with Chittagong Wasa kind of left off, which was post her mega project, as she alluded to, there were still clusters of Chittagong that were beyond the pipe. And what we effectively wanted to have as our kind of story for how we should grow is to really find how we could connect with the World Banks and Asian Development Banks of the world, especially once the mega piped water project was done, to help them ring fence the sites that were ideal for a decentralized ATM. And this kind of timing wise worked out perfectly for us. So effectively what we do is when the utility says, okay, I've just finished this massive mega project, I still have these clusters that are beyond the pipe. That really helps us when it comes to figuring out how can we cluster, and it's a theme I'll keep coming back to, enough systems to where as a kind of cohort of units, I can reach a bankable project, which on its own is insufficient, but collectively is actually something that you can have be financed, not through just purely subsidies, but a blended capital stack. And so at its core, it starts with the idea that we're kind of building off of the master plan of the utility and really helping them avoid any overlapping investments that are misaligned, because we're kind of working out of sync with the utility, but we're really kind of coming in exactly where a mega project might leave off. So if I think about kind of the journey, in Dhaka, Asian Development Bank was a mega project funder, and they had done a massive, what's called district metered area transformation across the utility. And what they found was that there's 700 pumps, of which they wanted to deploy ATMs in a phase-like manner where they would do the boring work to install the district metered areas. So that's kind of what really allowed us to start this journey with Dhaka. I think for us, we were lucky in that Dhaka as a utility is one of the largest in the world from a public sector perspective. I believe it was Sao Paulo, and Sao Paulo kind of split into two. Dhaka Wasa is responsible for providing 20 million people safe drinking water. And as a result, its balance sheet is quite strong, and it actually is profitable. And so it had actually a cost share proposition where we would 50-50 share the CapEx. But then when we thought about how we could scale the model, and just for context, Dhaka, our agreement is for up to 500 systems by next June. We're currently about 270. When you look at smaller utilities like Chittagong, that's a loss-making utility. Their balance sheet doesn't generate free cash flow that can easily be earmarked for cost share with startup partnerships. And so we started off really scratching our heads wondering how we could work with the Chittagong Wasa, knowing full well that they didn't have the resources that a Dhaka Wasa would have. And that's where really the partnership with Shoma's team came in. It first started with her just connecting me directly with the project director on the Chittagong Wasa side. And what that really did is it reduced the number of meetings. You know, a KPI that a lot of us, I think, look at is time to deployment. I tend to think about time of meetings, how many you need, how long each takes, particularly how long you have to wait in the lobby before you can meet with the person you're supposed to meet with. And I think just having an introduction from a task team leader really helps that KPI. Because we're at the end of the day burning money every month, right? As a startup, you really have to be managing your time extremely well. And I think that's the first key point with the WTAP program and just the partnership is that credibility. There's no funding that Shoma had to outlay for this introduction, but it was simply her using the trust that she had with the WASA project director saying, here's a project that's been vetted that I think you should actually take a look at. So the most important kind of slide, and I would say this kind of summarizes the last 5 years of my life, is the cash flows. Because at the end of the day, I think when we get excited about innovation, the question always comes down to how you can graduate from philanthropic support in the beginning to something that's a bit more market driven, to something that has a bit more hope to just organically grow without, you know, constantly needing to beg for grants. And so it started with, and I think this kind of shows the start of our journey in October 2017, where we initially deployed about, you'll see about like 12 systems in the first year. And the deep blue line is actually showing you the average revenue per ATM. And as is typical, I feel like when you initially roll out systems, they're over-resourced, right? You're like super focused on making sure they succeed. Your whole team is fixated on making sure that all the KPIs are optimized for. And then as is typical, when you then double that, things kind of tend to precipitously drop, which is what happened here. If you look at basically August 18, we were above $900 per ATM in terms of revenues. And just so you know, the tariff for the water is actually set by the utility. And so the blue line is actually the tariff of water sales that Beyond the Pipe consumers purchased from us every month. You'll see the precipitous drop. And what happened there was basically at that time, we had gotten a contract for 300 units. And we realized that to meet that target, and these are very deployment focused targets, that all of a sudden there's a lot of pressure to start to scale up your systems, to start to scale up your processes for site selection. But then you're also hitting against fiscal year budgets in Bangladesh. It's end of June. You're hitting up against political appointments expiring of certain key decision makers who want to have enough deployments in their area of influence. And we really didn't have the system set up to kind of defend against those. And what ended up happening, frankly, is we didn't really have full control of site selection. Utility and kind of other stakeholders had a lot of influence in wanting to kind of stovepipe sites in certain areas. And we ended up in a situation where in around early 19, we had an average revenue that was below the OPEX break even. And we realized that if we kind of continue to march down this path of hitting 300 systems, the system wouldn't really be as a scheme viable anymore. And so we actually had to pause for effectively the rest of 2019 to kind of really figure out how do we ensure a proper marketing and a sales campaign to ensure that every time an ATM booth came online, that there were enough awareness tactics, there was enough focus on awareness to ensure you had customer acquisition. And that took a very long time, and it was obviously frustrating for the utility, who was focused on upping the number of deployments. But then as we kind of hit 2020, we realized that you can do a lot of sales commissions with ATM booth operators to grow your average sales. COVID hit, and naturally that was a time when we weren't able to do a lot of marketing. But then kind of what we did is, even if you look at today, this is numbers from July, we're still not at 300, but that's okay. I think what we're most proud of is if you look at the green line, that's how much you need to make per month to service debt for a 3-year CapEx payback period. And what we realized over time, and what Shoma was saying was, it was like 2019, end of 2019, early 2020, when we started the Chittagong work, we realized that you can't just chase deployments, you have to chase cash flows. And today, we're kind of at a situation, at least in Dhaka, where we're generating enough revenues to be able to service a 3-year debt with concessionary interest rates, so single digits. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see in Chittagong, we took those learnings, and we're only at 6 deployments. But the reason why we kind of did things a little slower was because we realized that we need to be laser focused on, at every new utility environment, what are the different sales tactics, what's the water quality, what's going to be the OpEx cost, to ensure that we're consistently above not just the red line, but the yellow line to service 5-year debt. And then ideally, what we want to do is kind of get above the green line as a way to kind of say, okay, you've now got a machine that you can keep scaling and you can kind of have win-win economics with.
Thank you, Minaj. Touch points here that the whole idea was to de-risk the innovation adoption by utilities, because utilities are often have formidable challenges in bringing in innovation beyond their current thinking. So, and particularly working with startups or innovators, so they always are looking for some honest knowledge broker. And what we did as in the bank is it's beyond the scope of our project, but there was no financial strings attached with the World Bank loan, the credit proceeds. So it is more about how do you make the infrastructure that the World Bank was building actually reaches out to the communities who will then be served by good quality water, because the water is being produced but not being served because the tertiary networks are not going to be done within the scope of the project timeline. So it was perfect for us to bring in, to look for innovations that the clean water that has been produced actually gets to the houses, because we know the house connections will take a long time. So that's where the breakthrough came in terms of to find out how do you set up decentralized ATM units, which the utility can find a win-win way to serve the population, and at the same time, to use start looking into a better customer base and look into the financial models. The second takeaway from here is think beyond the scope of, outside the box and see where innovations can come in. And it's to connect, and WTAP actually provides that platform and bringing in innovations not only to the utilities, but to reach out to the utilities. It is first to go through with our own task team leaders. And once they know what are the innovations happening down the service delivery chain, how can we be a connector here beyond the scope of the project and help the utility to turn around? So that was the second takeaway. The third is to be the trusted partner here. And what Minaj did not say, that I actually did a background check even before I introduced Minaj to Chittagong. And it was very easy because he was already doing it in Dhaka. So I quietly brought in the Chittagong utility project director and the engineers to Dhaka. We had a meeting in Dhaka for one of our project consultations, and connected the Chittagong MD with the Dhaka MD. And I think that was the best trusted partner than what, to see it from one MD listening to the other MD, taking the colleagues, the utility colleagues, to see one of the kiosks in Dhaka, and said, perfect, that will save the face of the utility by giving water what we are producing.
Wow.
Thank you, Shoma and Minaj. So I think the main takeaway from this case study, the win-win theme is that PPP models enable utilities to partner with startups to fill gaps in service coverage. So now let's move on quickly to the discussion question for the audience, which we hope to dive in later with you during the discussion roundtables. So Minaj, do you want to introduce some of the challenges you've faced? And
Yeah, I think just to reiterate a point I raised earlier, Dhaka is a very kind of canary in the coal mine, in my opinion, as a profitable utility that services 20 million people, that has a very large balance sheet. I think the question is, how do you work with the Chittagong Wasa, Khulna Wasa, Rajshahi City Corporation, other utilities that don't have the luxury of being in a megacity? And I think with that comes the opportunity to, and there's a few people here in the audience that have been our partners, to sequence capital to where you can initially get grants, but then always have a laser focus on what the end game capital structure is, when you can layer in concessionary debt, and then when you can slowly have, even if a utility doesn't have cash to provide, what are the other resources they could provide to where you can eventually kind of structure something that